This is a story about empanadas. So where in the world would you go to get a private cooking lesson all about empanadas? Chicago, of course. So let's go talk to chef owner of Frontera Grill, Rick Bayless. What is an empanada? What's common among all empanadas?
It just refers to the fact that you have a wheat flour crust that goes around some sort of a filling, and it's either deep fried or it's baked. For regular, sort of everyday fare, they're usually meat, but in Mexico, typically not beef, but made with pork.
Sometimes you see cubes of meat in empanadas,
Yeah.
and sometimes you see ground meat. Is that regional?
The cubed meat is not very common in Mexico. That's much more in South America. And pretty much anywhere that Spaniards settled in the New World, they brought this whole concept of empanadas because it's a very easy to eat handheld treat. In southern Mexico, they always roast tomatoes before they puree them. And so what I've used here is actually a can of roasted tomatoes to create that same depth and richness of flavor. And now, if you want it, the canned chipotles. These are smoke-dried jalapenos.
I can handle those.
You can?
I can handle those.
Good,
Those
good,
are
good.
fine.
And they add a nice smokiness, which I think goes very well with the roasted tomatoes there. So the classic dough for a fried empanada will be a combination of flour, salt, water, and some sort of fat. And in Mexico, it's typically fresh rendered pork lard. So that's what I've got here. The nuts that are typically added to a pork picadillo will either be almonds or peanuts. And then typically a little bit of raisins will be added or some other kind of candied fruit. And then the classic edge in Mexico is the rope edge. So that is made by sort of folding over and pressing out. And this, of course, will give you a beautiful edge, but it also gives you a very firm seal. When you walk along the wharf in Veracruz, there are all these fish empanada sellers, and they have beautiful rope edges on all of their empanadas. And they'll either be fish, or they'll be bacalao, or there'll be some crab in those, always flavored with tomatoes, just like this, but they always put a little bit of caper and olive in it. We don't use lard to cook these in because I think it makes them a little heavy. Sometimes they're fun to eat when they're fried in the lard, but they're a little heavy. This is queso añejo. It's a garnishing cheese in Mexico that is a little bit like the flavor of Romano. Got a little chopped cilantro here that we can just sprinkle over the top of them, and they look a little bit more finished.
That was phenomenally good. They're not actually that spicy. Maybe I'm growing up. I'm more evolved person than I was half an hour ago.
I think you are.
These were, in fact, the best empanadas I've ever had, but since you're a professional chef and you don't make house calls.
Not really.
I don't think so.
No.
So let's go into the test kitchen and figure out how to make great empanadas in anybody's kitchen. Well, one thing I learned from Rick, and that is there is no such thing as a recipe for empanadas.
That's right.
So we're going to start fresh,
right,
within the confines of empanada, which are rather large, and figure out how to make it here at America's Test Kitchen so it's easy for you to make at home.
That's right.
And also delicious.
Well, we're going to make a Chilean style, which is an empanada de pina. And the flavors of that are olives, raisins, garlic, really, really beautiful. Mixes well with the beef. And we are making beef empanadas. But before I get to the beef, I want to get to a little bit of the filling here first. In this 12-inch nonstick skillet, I've got 1 tablespoon of olive oil, which I've heated until it's just shimmering. I'm going to add 2 onions, which we finely chopped. We'll stir it around a little bit. What we're looking for is this onion to soften and just start to brown. And that's going to take just about 5 minutes. I'm going to put you in charge of babysitting the onions. It's your big day, Chris.
I still don't get a knife. I just get a safe spatula. I can't cut myself.
Or me. Even more important.
Good point.
So this is 85% lean ground beef. Now, we're using a pound of ground beef, but we can't just add it into our filling because it's kind of crumbly and almost burger-like, and we really want it to have a lot of moisture and a lot of richness, but we didn't want to add more fat. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to make a panade. And a panade is a paste of bread, and the paste coats the proteins of the beef. And what it does is it forms a gel around the proteins and makes them more rich and kind of luxurious and a lot more tender. Now, what I've got here is I've got 1 slice of white bread, just torn into quarters. And this is 2 tablespoons of chicken broth. And I'm going to mix these together until they form a paste, and that's going to take about 5 seconds. All right, so that's looking pretty good. And you can see it's definitely a paste. All right. So now we're going to put this beef right in there and going to mix it with that panade. And what this does is obviously it coats the meat, but it's also going to make it finer. I've got 3/4 teaspoon of salt and a 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper. I'm going to mix this together, but this time I'm going to pulse it until it's roughly chopped. And that's going to be about 6 to 8 1-second pulses. I don't want to over-process it because then it'd be empanadas de pate, which we don't want. All right, looking good. So that's been about a full 5 minutes, and you can see that the onions are starting to turn brown.
Yeah.
So if you could relinquish your spatula, please.
You have to sign it out.
We're going to add some more aromatics. This is 4 cloves of garlic and a teaspoon of ground cumin. We've got a 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. And then an 1/8 teaspoon of clove, which is definitely characteristic of the empanadas de pina. And it's not going to take long for those spices, as soon as they hit that hot pan and the hot oil, to really bloom their flavors. All right, that smells great. Time to put in the beef. We're going to cook this with the aromatics. And I'm going to take a wooden spoon and kind of break this meat up into a little bit smaller pieces. We don't want giant meatballs in there. And we want the beef to completely brown. After the meat is brown, I'm going to add another 1/2 cup of that chicken broth. And we're going to cook that and simmer the beef in with the chicken broth until that mixture is really nice and moist, but you don't want it to be soupy or too loose. So this is that beef mixture. I just finished cooking it. Put this in the bowl. In the meantime, we can make our empanada dough. So we're going to start off with one of our pie doughs for this, but we made some modifications along the way. Now this is 1 cup of all-purpose flour. Now we wanted a little bit more of a heartier flavor to this than rather just a regular pie dough. So we're going to add a cup of masa harina to that. Now masa harina is basically a fine ground dehydrated cornmeal.
You make it by just drying corn kernels, soaking it in lime water, and then it's a mash, which you can use to make tortillas.
That's right.
If you dry that, you get masa harina. It's masa that's been dried.
All right, so I'm going to add some more flavors to this. I've got a tablespoon of sugar, just granulated sugar, and that's 2 teaspoons salt. All right, so I'm just going to pulse this mixture together quickly. Okay, so now we're going to add the fat. And we're using all butter here, the flavor.
Bridget always smiles. Say fat. Go ahead, say fat.
Fat.
Say lard.
Lard, bacon, pork.
Okay. It worked.
It did. Small ways to make me happy there, Chris. And this is 12 tablespoons of cold, unsalted butter because we like butter flavor. Goes right into that flour and masa harina mixture. Now, I've got a couple of cups more of all-purpose flour, but I'm not going to add it in there yet. So I'm just going to pulse this mixture until it's completely blended. It's going to resemble coarse, wet sand.
So this is a much leaner dough than a typical pie dough, or
That's
American
right.
pie dough.
That's right.
Yeah.
But you know this has been completely blended. So now I'm going to add the other 2 cups of all-purpose flour. And I just want to give it a few pulses until it's completely blended together, nice and even. All right, so just going to dump all this into the bowl. So what I've got here are 2 liquids, equal parts, a 1/2 cup of water and a 1/2 cup of silver tequila. Just going to kind of trickle this over. All right, and drizzle this. Now, this is very similar to our pie pastry in which we add both water and vodka, but instead of vodka, we're
How south of the border of you, Bridget?
add tequila, that's right. So I'm just going to use my hands and start to bring this together, just kind of pushing this together till it forms a cohesive mass, almost kneading it, really. All right, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to put it right on my board. So I'm just dividing the dough into half. I'm going to form each into a disc. So we're going to make 12 empanadas. I'm going to cut this disc right across and then do my best to cut it into 6 equal little triangles. There we go. All right, so I'm going to cover this with some plastic wrap because this dough will dry out. I'm going to put it in the refrigerator. We want this to get really well chilled before we roll it out. It's going to take about 45 minutes. You know, you can make this up to a couple days in advance, really. So we're just going to set that off to the side for just a minute while we finish our filling. This filling has cooled down for 10 minutes, so it's safe to add our remaining ingredients here. These are ingredients we really didn't want to saute and start losing some of their flavor, so we're going to add them at this point. I've got here a 1/2 cup of fresh cilantro, which we've coarsely chopped, 2 hard-cooked eggs, again coarsely chopped, and a 1/3 cup raisins, beautiful sweet flavor. Olives, this is a 1/4 cup of green olives, which we've coarsely chopped, and 4 teaspoons of cider vinegar. In that goes. Now this is a little bit sweet, a little bit savory, a little bit tangy, and don't forget the heat from the cayenne, a little bit spicy too. I might not fill an empanada with this. I might just take a fork to it. That looks so good. Okay, I'm going to cover this up with plastic wrap. And we're going to refrigerate the filling. It's got to stay in there for at least an hour. You really want that beef to kind of set. It's going to make it easier for us when we go to roll out the empanadas. I'm going to put the dough in there, too. It's got to stay in there for a good 45 minutes at least.
Okay. So let's talk for just a minute about tequila and pie dough. What's the problem with pie dough? Well, most recipes say add just enough water until the dough holds together. Very hard to roll out because everyone has dry dough. The problem with adding extra water at the beginning is then you end up with tough dough. Extra water combines with flour to form gluten, which forms a tough pie dough. So what's the solution? The solution is to use alcohol. Tequila is 50% alcohol. Two things come out of that. The first is the alcohol bonds with the water, which drives down the boiling point of the liquid from 212 down to about 185, which means over the baking time, there's going to be more evaporation, less water left at the end, and a flakier dough. The other benefit is that alcohol and flour do not form gluten the way water and flour do. So there's less water, and some of that water has been replaced by alcohol, and that does not form gluten. So on both counts, you get a very flaky, very tender dough.
All right, so it's been about an hour. Our dough is well chilled, as is our filling. We're going to get to the filling in just a minute. It's time to start shaping the empanadas. So I'm going to give you a little triangle. Take one for myself.
And I got to get this into a round. Is that the...
Well, you're going to see that this dough is pretty darn pliable. And I like to start by kind of shaping.
So I'm supposed to ape you, as it were?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Not sure what that means, but let's hope it's a good thing. So just into a little bit of a ball. It's going to make it easier for us to roll it out into a circle. And take your rolling pin. You would start rolling it out into about a 6-inch circle. Really, we're looking for something that is about, an eighth of an inch thick. And I've got this great bench scraper, and it's got a 6-inch measurement here. All right, I'm good that way. A little short that way.
Yeah, you are a little short that way.
Now, when you're done, just put it up there. You take a piece of plastic wrap and cover it up because we don't want it to dry out. We're going to roll all of these out.
Okay.
So sometime in the next year or two, when you're done.
Well, you know, you
It's like sharing the covers.
Look,
Good
Bridget,
grief.
this is public television. You got to be nice on public television. They take you right off.
I do?
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't tell me
It's
that.
like Food Channel. You can pull the stuff, but not on public television.
All right, so again, form it into a ball. Start to roll out.
So perfect circles are not that important?
No, they really aren't. So I guess that's kind of a obtuse looking.
This is like a modern art Andy Warhol thing.
Understand.
It's amoebic-like. Trim it up, it'll be great. Okay, we're done.
All right, so now we get to fill some of these. I'm going to put a few of these on the board, cover the rest of them. All right, so I've got our filling nicely chilled. You can see it's definitely more cohesive. You just want to scoop about a 1/3 cup of filling, maybe a little bit less to start. All right, so just going to put that right in the middle. I may need to scoot it up a little bit because we're going to turn this over. A little bit of water around the edge. And flip that right over. I'm going to start pressing that to seal it. Now, so you got a little paring knife there? See all these little mistakes right here? You can just cut that away for super pretty empanadas. Okay, so just take a fork and just crimp the edges, right? Don't get too far in or you'll pierce the turnover itself. Look how pretty.
Okay, there we are, another one.
Keep working, Chris. We've got to fill all these empanadas. It's like a factory here. All right, just finished crimping this last one. There we go. All 12, ready to bake. All right, so I'm gonna go to the oven and get those sheet pans. Now I've preheated an oven to 425 degrees. Each of those racks have got a rimmed baking sheet. Those baking sheets are heating up because we're gonna do a much easier technique to cook these than frying. All right, so I'm just going to put towels on these to remind me not to grab them. Super hot. So in order to get these empanadas to almost taste like they've been fried and feel like they've been fried, we're going to put 2 tablespoons of olive oil on each of these pans. Perfect. All right, so now we're going to put these back in the oven and get that oil good and hot before we add our empanadas. All right, it's been 2 minutes. I think the oil on those baking sheets are hot enough now. Now, this oil, this hot oil in the pan, it's going to start to fry the bottoms of these empanadas. So I'm going to fit about 6 on each of these sheet pans. So we got the bottom good and oiled. It's going to get nice and crisp in the oven. I'm going to brush the tops with another tablespoon of oil. And this is going to get those tops that almost oven-fried feel. Quickly, back into that oven. Now, they're going to stay in there until they start to get nice and brown. That's going to take about 25 to 30 minutes. Now, about halfway through, I'm going to switch their positions, and I'm also going to rotate the pans 180 degrees to make sure they brown nice and evenly. So when they're done baking, I'm going to take them out and transfer the empanadas to a cooling rack and let them cool for about 10 minutes before we eat them. All right, you always show up when it's time to eat.
I never miss a beat when it comes to that.
They look pretty. All right. Look at that. That is beautiful. But you can see how flaky that dough is. I'm going to see how tasty it is.
This is phenomenally delicious.
Really, really flavorful filling, too.
So the secret to great South American empanadas, home style, was to start with beef, not pork, and then we made a panade of bread and chicken stock. And then we used a tequila-based pastry dough on the outside. You end up with a nice flaky dough. And finally, we oven-fried it, which means you end up with a little bit of fried flavor, but it's much healthier and also a lot easier. So there you have it. For America's Test Kitchen, your kitchen, a fabulous recipe from South American-style empanadas. And by the way, you can go to our website, americastestkitchen.com, and see a lovely video of Mr. Bayless at Frontera Grill in Chicago making empanadas Mexican style.
I'll learn the right way.
You'll learn another way, not the right way. There is no right way, but didn't your parents tell you that?
No.
You know, I'm easily irritated in the kitchen, as Julia knows. One of the things that really bothers me is when you try to cook something from another culture, they really should stay in the other culture because they're ingredients you can't find. You have to be retired or unemployed to take all day to do it. Or for whatever reason, it just doesn't translate well to the home kitchen. This is, however, an exception.
It is.
The basic recipe is pork tinga, which is shredded pork. It's really braised for a long time. We can do it all inside. You don't have to do it outside.
That's right.
It's delicious. And Julie has come up with a method for doing it in an American kitchen that actually makes sense.
I'm using supermarket ingredients.
Okay.
All right, so the thing is, like you said, this is much like shredded pork with barbecue sauce, but it's Mexican style. So the barbecue sauce is a tomato sauce flavor with dried chilies and whatnot. And the method is very different than a traditional barbecue. We're going to braise the meat in a saucepan with some water till it's tender. Then we're going to shred it up and fry it till it's crisp on all sides, and then you add the sauce. So,
could you be more enthusiastic about this?
I love this recipe. It's one of my all-time faves. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut the roast crosswise into 1-inch thick slabs. This is a pork butt. This is 2 pounds. Pork butt is from the shoulder and has good connective tissue and fat so that it braises really well. And then you simply cut the slabs into 1-inch hunks of stew meat. And then while you're doing that, you can discard any big pieces of fat. Now, you don't have to go crazy because the fat will render out as it stews. And again, this meat's going to be shredded up, so you don't have to be too particular about the size. So now we're going to braise it. This is 6 cups of water. But to give this more flavor, we're going to add 1 onion that we cut into quarters, a couple sprigs of thyme, a little bit of salt, and 3 garlic cloves. Smash them to release their flavor a little bit. So we're going to turn this on medium-high heat, bring this to a simmer, and when it's good and boiling, we're going to put the lid on, turn the heat down to medium-low, and let it go till the meat's really tender. That could take 1 hour and 15 minutes to 1 hour and a half. So it's been about 1 hour and a half, and you can tell the pork's tender when it really just starts to shred apart with a fork. So we're going to drain the pot. So now I'm going to pick out the chunks of onion and garlic and the thyme sprigs that were left. I'm going to add the drained meat back to the pot, and we're going to shred it. But before I forget, I'm going to reserve a cup of this super flavorful liquid because we're going to use it in our sauce.
Pork stock.
Good. Pork stock, exactly.
There you go.
Shredding pork, lots of different ways to do it. The easiest way we found was just with a potato masher, and you saw how tender that pork is. It really just takes a couple go-arounds. It just shreds to nothing instantly. All right, so now we're going to take a 12-inch nonstick skillet, put it over medium-high heat, 2 tablespoons of olive oil. So this is 1 chopped onion, half a teaspoon dried oregano, which is really common in Mexican cooking. And then we're going to add our shredded pork. And we're just going to fry this for about 7 or 10 minutes again until the edges of the pork are good and crisp.
So without crispy edges, it ain't tinga?
That's mine.
Is that what you're saying?
You said it. Those crispy edges are going to taste so good. Now time to build the sauce, the tinga sauce. And this is 2 cloves of garlic, And this is a tablespoon of ground chipotle powder. And of course, that chipotle flavor is a smoky jalapeno flavor, and it'll really give this sauce its flavor.
Yeah, we found the ground is a little harder to find. But we liked it because it's smokier, but you can buy a couple of them in the can.
Yes.
The chipotle peppers in the sauce.
Yes.
Adobo sauce.
Yeah. Now we're going to add the tomato product. And this is a 14.5-ounce can of tomato sauce. Of course, we're going to add a cup of reserved braising liquid and 2 bay leaves for a little flavor. So we're going to let this simmer and reduce down to the sauce is nice and thick, and that'll take about 7 minutes. I'm actually going to slide it 1 burner over because we're going to do a little frying. This is my favorite part of this recipe.
Why does your face light up when you say fry?
I know, I love the tostada part. And we're going to fry our own, and that was 3/4 of a cup of vegetable oil. We have a little 8-inch skillet here. The key to frying them is to get the oil hot enough, 350 degrees. And the other key is to use a fork and put a few holes in the center of each tortilla so that they don't puff up when you fry them. All right, so the oil's good and hot. We're going to slip our corn tortilla in the oil. This will just take a couple seconds to cook through until it's nice and golden, and that'll cook the first side, and then you can flip it over to cook the second side. One thing to note, it'll continue to turn golden after you take it out of the oil, of course, the residual heat. So you want to take it out a little less than what you'd like it to be. All right, so that guy looks gorgeous. And a little salt, tostada for you. And now we're ready to try the tinga. Oh, that looks good. Much like a taco, it's all about the toppings for me. I like the avocado on there because it's a nice, cool complement. Little cilantro, queso fresco, which is a fresh Mexican cheese. If you can't find queso fresco, you could use feta. Oh, and some lime, of course.
See what you made me do? This is the most embarrassing thing I've ever eaten on television in 11 years.
Wait, this is the most embarrassing thing you've done on television?
No, I didn't say done. I said ate.
I think I saw you in a bunny suit once.
No, it wasn't me.
Oh, isn't that good?
Delicious.
The spicy tinga with the chipotle.
Let me just tell you, this is one of the top 5.
I agree.
11 seasons of the show.
I agree.
Top 5 recipes. Fabulous.
Easily.
So great pork tostada is actually not hard to do. We just had cubed pork shoulder, boil it for an hour and a half, mashed it, and then fried it up in a skillet, and then some smoky chipotle powder. I finished it up with a tomato sauce. You can just fry up your own corn tortillas or just buy them at the stores. There you have it, a fabulous recipe. This is actually one of our all-time best recipes. If you'd like this recipe and all the recipes from this season of America's Test Kitchen, tastings and testings as well, go to our website, americastestkitchen.com. You can also watch selected episodes of the show right there on your screen. This is really, really good. I don't care if I look stupid eating this.
Who cares?
You're supposed to say I don't look stupid.
Oh, is that what I'm supposed to say?